Welcome to the 2018 Wolf Cattle Seminar. Before we get started here, Dean Somerville with the Heartland Limousine Association has a quick presentation to a commercial producer.
Thank you, Nate. It's a pleasure for me to award every year a commercial producer from whatever state we are in the heartland. And this year, the Minnesota Limousine Association nominated and selected a family from Hancock, Minnesota that have been purchasing limousine bulls for 23 years from Wulf cattle. And so the Asherman family from Hancock runs about 275 Angus crossed stock cows. They buy purebred limousine bulls. They calve in late March or first 3 weeks of March. They background their cattle and then sell them on normally in the first week of March of the following year. They sell them in the country and they are source verified, age and source verified, IMI Global. They produce mainly for the NHTC market, and it's a pleasure for the Heartland Limousine Association as well as the Minnesota Limousine Association to award Larry Curry and Jake Asherman of Hancock with this award. Would they come forward? Did you want to say something?
I'll let him. He's yours, and I'll let him speak.
Okay.
Man, a few words. So thank you, everybody, and that's about it.
Congratulations, Ashmans. I was telling Eric that is one of my favorite feeder cattle deliveries because I only have to drive about 6 miles from my house instead of chasing across Montana to go find a set of cattle. With that, the 2018 seminar will go underway here, and the title to this seminar is Next Generation Cattle Management. Our lineup of speakers tonight will be Dr. Key Jim, founder of Feedlot Health Management Services, Dr. Eric Belke, consulting veterinarian with Feedlot Health, and then Dr. Troy Drake. With that, a couple housekeeping items for many of you producers. Part of the next generation cattle management starts with individual animal management, which to do that we need the RFID tags, and many of the feedlot managers and Robin and our team really wanted to just stress the importance of proper EID placement. And as you can see, the star there, the diamond shape, is one of the recommended places for the EID tag, along with the picture here on the top of the ear, close to the inside, is where we will see the best retention of the EID tag. And just one thing, while we had a large group of people together, wanted to capture that and get that passed out. So with that, we'll turn it over to Dr. Key.
Good evening, everyone. I'm happy to be here at the Wulf Cattle 30th Bull Sale, which is the 30th sale, I believe, at this location. So anytime you do anything in the cattle business and you survive for 30 years, I think you're have to be doing something right. Today I'm going to talk about next generation feedlot management. And before I begin that part of the talk, I'd just like to give you a very brief background. I was raised on a small ranch in the interior of British Columbia, north of Kamloops. You probably never heard of it because it is pretty close to the middle of nowhere. At least I'm very certain you can see it from there. A small town of about 50 people. So people that say from a small town, I say I'm from a really small town, small enough that you needed your own tomcat. So from there, I went off to university, and I'm a veterinarian by training. I graduated in 1983 and started a veterinary feedlot consulting practice just south of Calgary, Alberta, in Canada. I was very fortunate in life. Things require, you have to have the right idea, but you also have to have the right timing. And my timing was impeccable in terms of starting that type of endeavor at that point in time in Canada, because it was the very beginning of the big growth in cattle feeding in Western Canada. When I started in 1983, Canada was a deficit producer of fat cattle, so we weren't producing enough even to meet domestic demand. And over the 35 years that I've been involved, Canada, and more specifically Alberta, has grown to be a net exporter. 50% of the beef from Canada has to be exported, and the cattle feeding sector has grown from virtually nothing to roughly the size of Colorado output, right? So 2.1 million head a year, or thereabouts. Over that time frame, again, timing is important. I started feeding cattle in 1983, and I bought 6% of a share pen of 300. I think that's 18 head. And it was 90% financed by the feedlot, who obviously hadn't had an opportunity to look at my balance sheet. Right? They probably wouldn't have done that. Right? So I've been very involved in cattle feeding over that time period, and through the industry in Western Canada was extremely profitable for the period of 83 for a 15-year period. We went along and didn't lose any money. I thought it was illegal to lose money on cattle feeding, but and that's certainly not true today, but got off to a very good start there. And over the 35-year period, GK Jim Farms, my cattle feeding entity, operates in Texas, Colorado, Western Canada, and most states. I think that I've fed cattle in over 100 different locations in North America, and I've grown the marketings to over 200,000 head a year. So I've been, very involved in the consulting side, and also in feedlot ownership and feedlot cattle. In that time frame, the consulting company has grown from one individual, myself. We now have a team of over 40 professionals, veterinarians, nutritionists, statisticians, IT people, and so on. We employ about 100 people in total, and we have customers in Canada, in the US, in Mexico, in South Africa, in China, and in Russia. So now I'll come back to the topic here, which is management of feedlot cattle, and how we're moving ahead in the areas of procurement, production, and marketing. So if you think about feedlot management, you have to buy the cattle, you have to produce at the feedlot level, and then at the end you have to market the cattle. And all of these areas are extremely important. I want to talk a little bit about procurement. Traditional system, which I've been a big part of over 35 years, is a complex network of selling with auctions, internet sales, order buyers, traders, agents, brokers, facilitators, etc., etc. I don't think there's a agricultural commodity in the world that's touched by so many middlemen. And I'm not using this term in a negative sense because I don't want to offend any people in the audience. It's just the way that the business evolved, right? So you had a very complex network, but the end result of that really is a system that has high transactional costs and a lot of physical inefficiencies associated with it. In addition to that, many of the steps that we take in the marketing significantly impacts the health of the cattle, and it's not positive, right? It's negative, right, through the systems. Now, the reason why that system evolved, and one of the principal reasons, is that it's the demographics of cow-calf production, right? Because throughout North America, there's a lot of production that occurs in small herds, right? And so the auction mart really was the gathering point, the central area where cattle could come in and the girls and the boys could be separated, and the number ones and the number twos and the various classes and the various weights and all those kinds of things. So that system came about for a reason, but what's always surprised me over time is the persistence of some of those activities. You realize that in North America in the supposedly 21st century, we still have systems where they put fat cattle through auctions, let alone the other end of things, right? And it just seems incredible to me that the traditional system, compared to what many of you do here in the audience, move the cattle directly from the ranch of birth, the ranch of origin, to the feedlot. And in doing so, those that sell cattle to Wulf Cattle, you've created really the largest direct sales network in the industry, right? So I think it's a compliment to all of you in the room here that have been able to see that the mechanism of doing that, right, has to be a more efficient and less costly way of doing business than the alternative systems. All of these alternative systems are going to continue for a long time in relation to herd size, geography, and so on. I get that. I've been involved in auction marts. I've owned part of auction marts. I'm not negative on the overall role of that, but when you have larger herds and you have direct access to someone who's willing to buy the cattle, then that would strike me as being a monumentally more efficient system, and in the long term has to, from first principles, give you the most money as a producer, right? Because in the system that I operate in every day and buy cattle and sell, buy cattle on the average, I try not to sell them on the average if I can avoid that, but certainly buying them on the average. When you're buying cattle in an auction, and I've sent my buyer to the system, I mean, everyone's pretty much in the witness protection at that point in time, right? Because I don't know what I'm buying. Yes, I have a visual. Yes, there's a phenotype, right? But how do I know when I get that animal to the feedlot, how's it going to gain? What's its conversion going to be? What's the dressing percentage? Are they going to get sick? Are they going to die? Am I going to treat a lot? All I can do is just look at the great average, right? And I'm going to bid them. I can figure out the board, figure out my cost to gain. I'm going to bid the cattle. If you truly have superior cattle, and I assume everybody in this room does, because I've never had a rancher tell me yet that he produces inferior cattle. Been doing this a long time, and no one has ever admitted to it. Yeah, but I know I bought a lot of them along the way, right? So somebody's doing it, right? I'm convinced of that, right? Because obviously when I get to the end of the pens there as you're selling them, there's there are some definite duds along the way. So when you bring your cattle to the feedlot directly, especially today, you have sufficient market data to effectively price the cattle. One of the arguments always made for auction systems is that, well, we need that for price discovery, yada, yada, yada. Yeah, I've heard all that, been there, done that. But at the end of the day, is that really true? Right, given the huge volumes of data freely available from the USDA, from Cattlefax, from the auction mart, you know what the price is, right? You don't have to submit them to physical inefficiency in order to figure out what the price is, right? I mean, there's no other commodity in the world does that, but we seem to do it. We seem to do it quite a bit on the cattle side. Just one interesting piece of information: when you bring your calves to an auction, and on the average day in the fall, and if you would have sold those cattle at the farm gate less 3% or 4%, what's the shrink differential between selling them that way and selling them through a typical auction system? Now you can say, well, it depends if I'm the first calf through the ring or the last. Yeah, all that. But at the end of the day, what's the average? Right? We've done this numerous times and looked at it. What's the differential? It's about 3 or 4% on pay weight. I see a few people nodding their heads. A few people probably disagree with that number, but it's in the ballpark. It's somewhere in there. So if you sell a 600-pound calf and you multiply by 4, I think that's 24 pounds, right? So bear that in mind as you look at the pricing and all the things that you go to negotiate. Okay, so once the cattle come into the system, so you've got two systems on procurement. You can buy cattle directly, and over time, who you're selling them to, if they have the history of your cattle, they know the health performance, they know the performance, they know the carcass, they're in the best position to give you the most money for those cattle. Or you can do it like the majority of the industry does, like I do in many cases day to day, and you phone me, I'll give you an average. Right, so I fail to see how in that system with superior cattle, how you're ever going to get consistently rewarded for that. You might get lucky one day, right? If you're selling, one day of the year and you bring them to the auction mart, somebody may really need cattle that day, right? Or there may be some events going on that makes the cattle price go up. But how did the guy feel 3 days ago that brought his calves to the auction when the China trade sanctions were announced, and the change in the price of cattle on the board in the last 2 days has been $8 a hundredweight, right? So timing here is if you take it all down to that 1 day transaction, you can get crossways pretty quickly, and there's not much you can do about it. Okay, on the production side, at the feedlot level, many of you involved in talking to the various ranchers have been involved in not only selling cattle direct, but in feeding cattle. And so at the feedlot level, in our case, it all boils down to really 5 things that are important. What's the feed conversion? In other words, how much feed did they eat relative to how they gained? What was the rate of gain? How many got sick? How many died? And what is the dressing percentage of the cattle and the subsequent carcass characteristics. Dressing percentage is extremely important because if people are thinking straight, they're going to sell cattle on the rail where the carcass is weighed. Right? And one of the characteristics of Limousin cattle is, on average, they produce cattle with a higher dressing percentage. Right? So that means if you're selling the cattle into beef, you actually get paid for that, because you're not selling them on live weight, you're selling them on carcass weight. Right? And now that seems like a fairly simple concept, but it's something that probably has managed to elude about half the people that feed cattle. Right? So sounds pretty straightforward. And again, if you're selling cattle with Limousin genetics and their influence, where your carcass characteristics and your dressing percentage, you need to be selling them on a rail mechanism in order to get that benefit. So the things that are important from a production viewpoint in the feedlot health approach is that what we're really trying to do is to improve the net profitability of the cattle that we're feeding, and not focused on improving a single metric like feed conversion, death loss, or cost of gain in isolation. And I'll just explain that briefly. If you want better feed conversion of in the cattle, feed them 5% fat, right? And feed conversion will improve, but your cost of gain may go up depending on what the price of the fat is. And then on the opposite extremity of the equation, you can look at, say in Idaho, where they have access to potato waste. You know, they'll feed a lot of potato waste because it's very low cost. What happens to feed conversion when you feed potato waste? It goes up. It gets worse, but it's cost effective because the cost of the ration goes down so much, right? So overall, you will improve your cost to gain. So when you're looking at a feedlot closeout, or you're trying to figure out what's going on, you have to bear that in mind. And the same thing applies to death loss. As producers, nobody likes death loss, right? But to what extent are you going to chase small numbers when you get things under control at an escalating cost point? Right, that's really the key issue is, well, how much money did I spend to achieve that point? And so, you know, just because a feedlot has an extremely low death loss, I think that's a good start, but until I see the price tag associated with that, can't really interpret that, right, as a standalone number. And the other thing that's really important is when you're looking at gain and conversion, and you're looking at the carcass data that you've been supplied as part of the package, it's very important to look at how big did the cattle get, right? Because as you increase the number of days on feed and the carcasses get beyond a certain point and get bigger and bigger, then you do suffer somewhat on conversion, but that may still be the most profitable thing to do. Because as long as the cost of putting on those additional pounds was less than the selling price of the cattle, you still have margin, and you still need to keep making them bigger, right? Until you get to the point that the packer is going to discount. But that's a pretty big carcass these days, right? The packers, I think there's some of my packer friends in the room, they won't punish you too bad until you get to about 1050. Right, or 1,000 pounds, 1050. That's a pretty big steer, right? And again, one of the attributes of Limousin cattle is the ability to get to higher carcass weights and still maintain feed conversion. If I can put weight on 100 pounds more live on that animal, and my cost to gain is $1, and the selling price is $1.20. Right, I've just made another 20 bucks, right? So size is the ability for cattle to get big and still be efficient is very important in feedlot production. And I know we all like to have small cows, right, to fit, especially, there's some folks here from Arizona. I've been down in their part of the world. They have one cow per 60 to 100 acres. Right, there's like considerable distance between the blades of grass, right? So yes, I agree. You need a smaller frame type cow to function in that environment, right? But at the same time, you need growth characteristics in those cattle in order to be a useful animal and a profitable animal in the feedlot. So in the ideal world, you have the smallest cow producing not necessarily the biggest calf at weaning, right? A reasonable weaning weight, but the capability to grow. I always ask people, well, how big do you think how big are your cows, or what do they weigh on average? Everyone raises good cattle, and everyone has a cow that's under 1,250 pounds. That's what I know, right? I'll tell you what, whatever number someone gives me, I'm going to add 100 pounds to it minimum. Right? When they're telling me how big their cows are. All I say is, have you sold any of those cows as culls? Yep. It says, how much did the carcass weigh? right? Take that number, divide it by 0.57, and that'll tell you how big your cow is on average. And very few people have cows, I don't care where you are in North America, that are under 1,100 pounds live weight. And you can say, well, it depends when you weigh them. If was it in the fall, you know, at the end of the year, you know, after, you know, yeah, I understand there's a difference there. Once again, if your cows weigh under 1,100 pounds, I'd be pretty surprised. So the other important aspect of our approach is that focused on net profitability, trying to do things that improve, but very much bearing what things cost in mind. And then at this stage, after being involved in this for 35 years, our protocols are driven by large pen research trials. Wulf Cattle has been involved in doing several of these, and they plan to do a lot more as we go ahead. In order to get the answer at the feedlot level, you have to take a pretty disciplined, methodical approach to producing quality data that you can rely on. One of the things that cattle producers often do is they often say, well, we did some research, right? I always find that term fairly interesting. Generally not. They didn't really do any research. They switched to doing something and they observed what happened, right? That's really what they did. That's a long ways, I assure you, from doing a trial, a proper trial, because if you make a change, right, only three things can happen. It can stay the same, it can get worse, or it can get better, right? That's all. There's only three possibilities. So by random chance, you're going to get changes that occur mainly in the feedlot because you didn't do it on the same cattle, and the risk profile of those cattle changed. Right, because, and probably the best example of that in the feedlot is every fall when we would bring in unweaned, auction mart derived, multiple commingled cattle, and it was 37 below, surprisingly enough, they got sick, right? Massive surprise, right? So we're treating a lot of cattle, and as soon as treatment rate goes up, just about every feedlot crew will develop the perception that the protocol is not working, right? As soon as treatment rate goes up and you're getting tired of treating calves, and if you start dying, you can say, oh, this isn't working. Then you say, we're going to do something else because this isn't working, okay? If you wait until about the 1st of December, anything you do, you'll think it's better, right? Because the problem was solving itself. Right, so one of the first things I learned as a veterinarian is that timing is critical for making changes, right? Because if you do it at the right time, anything that you do will be perceived as being helpful. Compare that approach to starting at a point in time and saying, okay, every other one that comes through the chute, we're going to treat with drug A and drug B, and now you're doing it in the same time frame. Right, and the cattle have the same risk. And so, yeah, when you add up that score at the end, that means something, right? But it doesn't mean anything if you just make a wholesale change. The fourth thing that's very important in our system is that we've developed the software and the chute side data collection tools and the software so that we can monitor events in real time, right? So in 1985, I put computers, they were desktop computers. They probably weighed about 37 pounds. The IBM PC, 1985, put it chute side to collect data real time so that you could respond to events as they occurred, and you can compile data, and you didn't have a box of cards that you took to the office, tried to enter into a mainframe at 10 o'clock at night and hope that you could get something out of that system. In a feedlot, with the quantity of data meant that the bureauing approach just wouldn't work, right? Not responsive enough. By the time you figured out what was going on, you already had 4 other problems to worry about, right? So so that we put a lot of emphasis on data collection tools and being able to respond real time to what the problems are or aren't. And Eric's going to give an example of that on the animal health side a little bit later. And Troy is going to talk about the data collection system that he's developed for the cow-calf operators to, put everything in on your phone. The other thing that I think is important about our approach is we have an integrated team approach. We have a very large group of people who are focused on feedlot production and have a broad range of expertise in all of the disciplines that are required to service a complex system like a feedlot. Then I want to talk a little bit about the marketing phase. So we've got the buying of the cattle, the production piece in the middle, where the tools and expertise to manage these cattle in real time, on the nutrition side, the animal health side, and also on the sorting side. Right, sorting of cattle, getting them into the marketing groups of the heavier cattle, the medium cattle, and the light cattle, and feeding the lighter cattle more days to bring them closer to the target carcass weight and so on are all very important parts of a feedlot management system. If a feedlot doesn't sort cattle, I would never feed cattle there, because you're not getting the maximum value out of the cattle if you think you can put a pen of cattle on feed and sell them as a pen, right? That works very poorly, right? Because the bigger cattle and the ones that were bigger on entry are the ones that gain faster. You're selling them too late, and the cattle that are the lighter cattle that still have more go in them, you're selling them too early. So on the marketing side, assuming that you're marketing cattle essentially in the cash, which is the majority of our customers and myself would be cash marketers of cattle. And you've got 4 major packers to deal with here in the US, and you also have some, depending on where you are, some fairly strong regional players, that make an important contribution to the price discovery. So you can sell cattle live, you can sell them flat rail, or you can sell them in grids. Again, it is surprising to me that with fat cattle, slaughter cattle coming out of feedlots, that people will sell them live, but it is a free country and you get to sell them however you want. But if I was a packer, I want to buy them live, right? Because over time, you lose that game because they have all the data to make the best guess and you don't, right? So that's not a very attractive system to me. Selling cattle flat rail, that means that you agree on a carcass price, and all cattle that are sold, when the carcass is weighed, you get the flat rail price. And typically, the flat rail price will be 63% divided by 63 of the cash, of the quoted cash price in that area. And as you know, there's a north-south spread depending on cattle availability. There's east-west spreads, and there's a number of different things that contribute to that average. But I think it's important to remember, and I mentioned that before, the only way to get rewarded for superior dressed-in percentage cattle is to sell them on the rail. Right? If you have limousin influenced cattle and you sell them live, you miss something along the way, like money. Right? So that's and if you have cattle whose carcass traits you like and you feel that they're superior, you're not really going to get that unless you have some mechanism of selling the cattle in a grid. All of the packers have grids. They're structured differently. They have different premiums and discounts. Some of them are fixed. Some of them are floating week to week, where you're going up against the average of the plant. Some are freight in, freight out. The base price can be derived from a 5-area average. It can be based off the Nebraska address. It could be based off the Kansas, Texas. So when you look at all of these things, and the choice select spread, and there's a seasonality influence in there as well, fairly complex, right, to look at what the various marketing options are and figuring out week to week what is the best decision. And when all the cattle we feed in the feedlots we work with, we have all the carcass data downloaded into the centralized database to try to figure all of this stuff out as week by week, you know, who we going to sell the cattle to, and what type of arrangement are we going to sell them in. Sometimes the right answer is a flat rail system. So just to briefly summarize here, I talked a little bit about aspects of procurement, some facets of production, and some of the marketing options that we have, or decisions that we have to make day to day. So this collection and cooperation, data exchange between Wulf Cattle and all the ranchers and feedlot health is going to result in the most efficient beef supply chain that can be built. I think we have all the necessary technology and all of the necessary people that have a real passion for the industry to put all of this stuff together, right, to create an excellent opportunity for you to sell your cattle, feeder cattle, and also an opportunity for you to get very quick, close to real-time, legitimate feedback on your both the health of the cattle and also the carcass characteristics, the dressing percentage, and so on. So you have the data that you can incorporate and use that information, which is what Troy's going to talk a little bit about next. So you can use that information in your cow herd to get better and to improve the things that are necessary to make the cattle higher value. And this type of efficiency in the supply chain, I believe, is what's going to differentiate what you're doing from what a lot of other people are doing, trying to rely on a single market moment in time to sell their calves. And when you do that, what you ensure yourself is that they do stay in the witness protection program, and so the next year you go to sell them, the buyer really has no way of dealing with that, because unless you sell an extremely large number of cattle, my ability at the feedlot end to keep those cattle separate from your ranch and feed them so I know what's going on a group basis is pretty limited, right? So many feedlots will tell you that they do that, right? And they have a good idea what your cattle do, and I would say, that's surprising because I don't, right? I don't know how you figured that out, right? Because you didn't really make an effort to keep them separate, right? So I fail to see how they would have the necessary data in order to make a much more informed decision about the nature and characteristics of your cattle. So I'll close there. Are we going to wait till the end for questions, or are we going to do a little bit right at the end? Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Eric Belke. I'll give you a brief introduction. So I grew up in southwestern Nebraska on a cow-calf ranch, a little town called Binkelman. And after multiple years of post-secondary education, after my veterinary degree, I moved to Okotoks, Alberta, Canada. And I've been associated with Feedlot Health Management Services for 8 years now as a veterinarian and production consultant. The the objective of the next 10 or 15 minutes here is to talk about some of the reports that Wulf Cattle has made available to a lot of the producers, and I see a lot of you are carrying those around. There's some animal health reports and some carcass reports. So we're going to talk about each of those and how to interpret those reports. So I want to start out here with one of my favorite pictures. So data are very amazing. And if you Google it, you will find out that 70% of smartphone users have an iPhone. Okay, so as we look around, there's about 150 people here, so that means there's about 105 iPhones in the room. And I've polled several audiences through various speaking engagements. I have found that on average, people have about 1,500 pictures on their phone. Okay, and out of the 1,500 pictures that I have on my phone, this is one of my favorite that I wanted to pull up. Okay, and these are preg check records. Any guess whose handwriting this is? This is my mother's, and so these data were recorded on November 18th, 2014. So I called her when I was going to do this presentation. I asked if she could take a picture of these records. And she said, now Eric, you be nice to me. And I'm going to be nice because this is not an uncommon way to collect data. You have a big chief tablet and a number 2 pencil, right? And we write down, we have the cow's ID. We have how many months pregnant they are, whether the cow was solid mouthed or not, and then on a body condition score, 1 to 9, okay? And these data are very partial to me. I'm very passionate about this because I was the veterinarian doing the preg checking. My mom was doing the recording, okay? And right now, I mean, these are valid data, right? We could go back. My father's name is Ted. And if I picked up my phone and I called Ted right now, I could ask him, Ted, on November 18th, 2014, how many months pregnant was cow 149? He could go down, and you guys have the same thing. You can all vision it, right? He could go downstairs, he could find his green notebook, he could dig this up, and he could tell me that cow 149 was 5 months pregnant in 2014 on November 18th, right? In the same amount of time that it would take him to go determine that, any member of our team could go into our database and they could determine what the mortality, so the death loss, and the morbidity or sickness of all the calves in the Wulf system were that were placed in 2017 and sorted out by ranch of origin in the same amount of time. And that, I just wanted to give that example to illustrate the importance of appropriate data collection system. This is still valid, but you do not have quick access to the data. I'm very fortunate to work in a system that Key started in 1985, and that data collection system has evolved over time through various, starting with the DOS-based application system to the current version, which is IFHMS. So IFHMS is the chute side data collection system that is in every one of the Wulf feedlots and every one of our clients' feedlots. There is a lot of information that goes into IFHMS, a lot of individual animal information. We then use that information that comes out over there on the right side to help make day-to-day decisions on the feedlot. However, this system is much more comprehensive than just helping to manage a feedlot. This is the overall big picture of IFHMS. Here it is in the central. There is a lot of information that comes into this. I'm going to talk a little bit about it. Every animal that dies on every one of our clients' feed yards, we do a full necropsy on it. And to do that, we utilize a web-based system. That information goes into IFHMS. We manage animals at the individual level and sort those animals using a proprietary system called dsort. All of that information goes into IFHMS. All of everything that happens to the animal at the chute, there's a chute side computer when arrival processing, when it was treated, that goes into IFHMS. And most importantly, all of the carcass, well, not most importantly, but importantly, carcass data all goes into IFHMS. All of those data are organized, and that allows us to generate reports that many of you have seen. So here is an example of the animal health reports. They've changed a little bit since last year and some of the previous years. This is what the current report looks like. There's a couple of highlights that I wanted to point out. One is each of you received 1 and maybe 2 reports. And that report will say something at the top. It's either going to say no metaphylaxis or with metaphylaxis. Metaphylaxis means those animals would have received an anti-infective at the time of arrival processing. If it says no metaphylaxis, they did not. Okay, so that's the difference. The reason some calves receive metaphylaxis and some calves don't receive metaphylaxis is based on that animal's risk of getting sick and or dying in the feedlot. There are several factors that contribute to that risk. Those are listed here. Body weight and age are two of the predominant factors that determine that. You can go down the list, you know, the procurement method, they come ranch direct, auction market. As we go down to the bottom here, historic and current animal health outcomes. If historically the cattle die at a relatively high rate or get sick at a high rate, there is a good chance that metaphylaxis was used in those cattle when they arrived this year. We will use this year's data and last year's data to determine what happens in the subsequent year. Okay? So all of those factors can be used. And like I said, we have a massive amount of data at our fingertips. Looking over several years, this is a graph that represents death loss in various groups of cattle, different sizes, by time of year. Okay? This is another representation of the power of data. So the height of the bar represents how the mortality within that group. We have light calves, 400 weights, all the way to yearling steers, January to December. The grade, no matter what group of cattle, if they are placed in October or November, they will die at the greatest rate, and the lighter they are, the greater the mortality. So that just really indicates the power of data and the effect of some of these variables on subsequent animal health outcomes. Okay, we're going to go back to your specific reports here. We're going to blow this up, and this is how these reports are set up. I heard a couple of guys talking about them there at the supper we had, so I thought it was good to fill everybody in. When you look at this report, in the orange here is your ranch specific data. In the blue, the right-hand column, is the Wulf database. So all of the cattle within that class. So all of the cattle, all of the 2017 calves that did not receive metaphylaxis placed in all the Wulf yards are over here. If your numbers are lower than the database, that is good. This is one time you don't want to win with a higher number, right? If you have 10, you actually lose. Right? 10 is not good because the database is 1.09. So in this particular example, death loss was 0.67 versus database 1.09. That's a favorable outcome. Okay? That is then broken down by how the animal died, or what it actually died from. Several classes there: bovine respiratory disease, histophilosis mortality, metabolic mortality. We can determine how every animal died because, as I said, we do a full necropsy on every animal that dies. When Key started Feedlot Health 35 years ago, he was the veterinarian going out doing the full necropsy. That doesn't really make sense as we've grown as a company and have a very large geographic footprint. Therefore, we have a website, and all of the feedlots prosect each of the carcasses. So they'll cut the carcass open, they will take a standard set of 8 photographs, a veterinarian from our office then makes the diagnosis. There are 93 options here. So everybody in here is probably taking a multiple choice test. When we make these diagnoses, that's what we do. We just have 93 options to choose from, right? So we go down and we make the diagnosis. Therefore, we can put it into the category. In this particular instance, 0.2% of the cattle died of bovine respiratory disease. A very common, so that is essentially pneumonia. This is a very common pneumonia we see here. When we open up the thorax and look at the lungs, we ask ourselves, is this normal or abnormal? What do you think? This is abnormal, right? This is fibrin here, and this is called a fibrinous pneumonia. So that's an example of bovine respiratory disease. Histophilosis mortality. A lot of people vaccinate with a 7-way with Somnus vaccine. You are vaccinated for Haemophilus somni. Here's an example. This is a heart. The heart is all supposed to be this nice pink color. We see here in the muscle, it's really white. That is a chronic myocarditis. This animal essentially died from a heart attack. This lesion was caused by Haemophilus somni, so that's histophilosis. Metabolic mortality, that's bloats and overloads, lameness, BVD, enteritis, and miscellaneous. You add all of those up and you get to 0.67. Okay? So now we're going to move down to the morbidity, which is essentially sickness. There are 3 different types of sicknesses there. Arrival fever, undifferentiated fever, and no fever. You add all of those up and you get to 3.98. I'm going to talk briefly about what each of those categories are. When an animal arrives, it is processed at the feed yard. Every animal that arrives there's a rectal temperature collected for that animal at the time it arrives. If that animal's rectal temperature is greater than 104.0, it is considered to be sick at arrival, and it is an arrival fever. Okay? So if you have a very high arrival fever rate, those animals were sick when they arrived at the feed yard. Okay? So now that animal arrives at the feed yard and it had a rectal temperature less than 104, it just goes into the pen. The pen riders check those cattle every day. Okay, so when that animal, say it's 15 days on feed, a pen rider identifies that animal as being sick, its head's down, its ears are droopy. You guys have all seen sick animals. It then goes to the hospital and a rectal temperature is acquired. If that rectal temperature is greater than 105, it is considered an undifferentiated fever. We don't know what the fever is from, but it does have a fever. Okay? If it looks sick and it has a rectal temperature less than 105, it is a no fever. So those three, arrival fever, undifferentiated fever, and no fever, are the three types of sicknesses that you will see on your report. Last part of the animal health report is here at the bottom. This is the distribution of temperatures at arrival. We feel that this is important because it kind of is an indicator of the sickness level of your cattle when they arrive at the feed yard. Okay, remember our arrival fever is cut off as 104, so we don't want to see a lot of animals over here above 104. Your specific data are the orange bars, the Wulf database is the blue bars. Okay, so that concludes the animal health reports. There's another report that all of you have received for several years now. Anybody that feeds cattle into the Wulf feed yards, and those are the carcass data here. Here's an example of the individual carcass data. You also get a summary report, and it breaks it down by which program the cattle are in, natural, NHTC, and commodity. So for the cattle harvested in 2017, this is what your report will look like. A lot of you have this specific report in hand, okay? So going forward, because we have this elaborate data collection system in place, we are not only going to provide your specific data for you, so any cattle harvested in 2018, we will provide a report that has your ranch and each of the programs, natural, NHTC, and commodity, your ranch's number, and then the Wulf database number. So all of the cattle in that same class, just like with the health data, that will be directly underneath. And then the change, your ranch relative to the database, will be below that. If you are below database, the numbers will be red, and if you're above database, the numbers will be green. You will receive those types of reports next year, so we wanted to give everybody a preview of what's coming down the pipe. So with that, I think you can appreciate the fact or the world that I did live in with this type of data collection system with a Big Chief tablet, right? And with these systems that we have in place, that the Wulfs have in place, with this partnership, we can generate these types of reports that help you make decisions on the cattle that will eventually end up in the Wulf system. And if this is still how you collect data, I'm not saying it's bad. However, it is a nice lead into the next presenter, who is Dr. Troy Drake, who is going to talk about how you can take your operation from this level to this level in terms of data collection. So, thank you, everybody.
Smartphone, it would go dead if it got lower than 35 degrees. With my old piece of paper and pen, my lead threw off, I pulled a jackknife and sharpened my pencil.
Yeah, well,
out the window goes your death.
Yeah, or get a, but there are several. Yeah, that's a good point. But there are several devices that will last the cold temperatures. Yeah, that is a good point. Yeah, good. Okay, all right. So here's Troy.
Thanks, Eric. That was excellent. Good job. Is everyone okay? Well, good evening, everyone. My name's Troy Drake, and I'm very happy to be here and feel very privileged to be asked to come down and speak to all of you. I come from up north, outside of Calgary as well. I grew up in a cow-calf farm northeast of Calgary. A little bit of commercial, a little bit of purebred. And then I did my veterinary training in Saskatoon. And I've always had a passion for the cattle industry, but more specifically the cow-calf side of things. And you know what we're going to talk about is a database program that we've developed since my early years as a vet. And as you've just seen with the fabulous information that Feedlot Health and can put together and report, I always marveled at that since Key's been putting that together in the mid-'80s, as well as a lot of the dairy farms have some awfully nice record-keeping systems as well. But it just seemed like there were programs out there available for cow-calf, but nothing was really, I felt, adequate enough to do so much more than what we needed. Best example is, in my early years, and I'm sure you've had this scenario where, I'm be out at a farm, I'd be preg checking cows, and they'd say, "Troy, I sure think we're having a lot more open cows this year." Or if it's springtime like it is now, and we're having a lot more navel infections or more diarrhea, etc. And I've got a pretty good memory, but without any data, it was really, really hard to assess whether maybe they just had more open cows because they had more cows. Those kind of scenarios. So it was troublesome, and so that's kind of the impetus for what we've been dealing with and working on for the last 20 years. I'm going to digress here just for a second. This is a true story that Key and I knew each other for a long time, and before we each got married and stuff like that. There's a pretty girl here on the screen that we met at an establishment one night, and I think I said something to Key about the fact that, boy, I'd sure think she's pretty special. And of course, Key's a consultant. He's always been a consultant. And he told me that I had zero chance with a girl like that. And even if I did, she'd be too high maintenance and I'd never be able to afford her. So he was half right. This is my wife, Karen. And the only reason I put that up there is because I'm sure none of you have ever heard about me before, but back home, I'm known as the guy that's married to the girl that rides the Calgary Stampeder touchdown horse. So that's my claim to fame back home. Now, when I said Key was half right, when I first married Karen, she wasn't high maintenance at all. But then we have 3 daughters, and I think the picture can say what everyone's thinking, that's where the high maintenance part come in. But the good Lord felt really bad for me. And so we have a little son, Jack, who's 11 now, and so that's pretty special. So I guess I wanted to start it off to make sure you knew that pretty passionate about 2 big things, and family first, of course, but cow-calf is what we're going to talk about here. There's a little indication of where I'm from. I thought at least when we flew down here that there might be a little less snow, be nice and warm. I wasn't even going to bring a coat, but you guys are making me feel right at home here today. This is a picture taken about 3 days ago of us feeding cows, and it's just been never ending at home. So we're really hoping that that's the same field actually, that we soon get to that once that snow eventually melts. So what is Herd Tracks? That's the name of this program we're going to talk about. It's a web-based phone-friendly software that makes it easy to capture information. It can also be used offline, so you don't always need, even though it's a web-based program, you can switch it to offline mode. And we feel it really simplifies the sharing of information between not just your farm, but eventually, feedlots like Wulf cattle. We bring in the carcass data. Lots of regulatory agencies, like you have your IMI, we have some different agencies and breed associations up north, of course, that we try to network and integrate the data as much as possible to make it more valuable. We currently have 605 subscribers on the program and a little more than 200,000 active cattle enrolled. This is just a picture of currently where all the herds are located and scattered. And as you see, we've had a few in the US. It's actually growing quite rapidly as of the last couple of years in the US, but it's obviously the majority of our work has been over time in Alberta. We feel the program has 3 main roles, and I think it's important for me to point that out because a lot of you are collecting data on your cows, obviously, and you're using probably a different set of programs. It might be Excel spreadsheets. It still might be pen and paper, like Eric points out in the Big Chief tablet. But first and foremost, what we've spent most of our time on is making it simple to use. I know when you hear something, oh, we're going to capture the data on our phone, and that seems to be all the rage. But sometimes those things can get pretty gimmicky and not very practical. And I've experienced that in spades. I mean, if it's not simple and we understand this, then no one's simply going to use it. So that's the number one goal of the program when we set out to build it. The next thing was then, we talk about being a consultant and giving people advice on things. We don't actually consult at all with what we do. We just want to make sure we get you your information captured simply and put into a format where it enables your decisions that you're making every day anyways. We just want to make your job easier. We feel that if the information is available to you, as you've seen on the feedlot side, it can become so readily apparent as to what you maybe need to do, whether it be how you select your replacement heifers, procure your bulls, your targeted mating plan for your cows, etc. I know you're all doing that within your herds. It's just sometimes the information on the best way to do that is lacking. And then what's really evolved out of this is this information sharing network. I mean, when we first started out, we had 5 accounts. And now in Alberta especially, it's probably a 1 in 4 chance that one of the producers that sells a bull or some feeder cattle or some replacement heifers to another producer they're also going to be on our program. So one of the things that we pride ourselves on is being able to transfer and shift those records and that data between accounts so that that information can be shared and ongoing and collected passively. So these we feel are the 3 key roles for the program. And this is a really busy screen. I'm not going to go through it one by one. I'd like you just to read down them. Start on the left side. And in broad strokes or broad categories, these are all the things that we can enter or that people are currently entering into the program. And then as we get to the right side, I've termed it management outputs, but that's really what I term our value proposition side. One thing I learned early on as a food animal veterinarian, that it wasn't just good enough to go to our farms and do the tasks. I mean, it really was mostly about whatever we were doing for you to make sure we were adding value to your operation. And I think we've carried that through. We're not here to tell you you should keep all of this information and not get anything out of it. I'd be the first one to tell you that if you collected a bunch of information and did nothing with it, why on earth would you collect it in the first place? So we're really all about making sure and you look at things as simple as inventory, knowing exactly how many cows you have at different locations and different groups and so forth. And as you read down the list there, and I sound like a broken record, but I know so many of those things you're already doing within your herds anyways, but sometimes it would be nicer, I think, for a lot of you to have that information compiled into a format so it was more readily available. So what I'm going to do now is just highlight what we find or the feedback that we get are some of the most popular features in the program, and in turn it'll give you a bit of an idea of the look and feel and what it's all about. One of the things I want to echo here is it is a web-based platform, so it works on any device, so you don't have to buy any hardware. There's nothing to install, and whether you have an iPhone or an Android or you prefer a tablet or a laptop, it really doesn't matter. It works on all devices. And I'd be really surprised, regardless of the age in here, of who doesn't have a phone. I'm sure the majority of you do. We feel the program is really phone friendly for that reason. And so here's an example of this is just a screenshot of the home screen if you log in on a computer or a laptop. But what I want to point out is if you logged in on a tablet, you see how the icons and everything shifts and adjusts to the screen size. And if you logged in on a phone, again, it would all line up nicely. There's nothing more frustrating than trying to navigate on your phone on a website that isn't made to work on a phone, and you're scrolling all over the place trying to find different things. So again, back to my earlier statement that it's really our goal to make it as simple for you to use as possible. The next thing is we have this global search. Is Robin handy there? We're going to launch this video. But I think it's important to point this out, that when you go to look for an animal, if you just watch the screen here, we have this one search bar. If you just start typing the name, the tag color, well, the name would be just for bulls, or a number, within your herd, it's a global lookup. And you find whatever animal you're looking for. So once you kind of get used to that, it becomes your friend in just about everything you do in the program. What I'm going to mimic here is if you had a RFID scanner connected and you scan into that same box, it'll find that animal, look it up, and go right to that animal's record. I guess the point I wanted to make with this is it's just one specific box. So if you can imagine when we ask you to go do a calving record and you find that cow, you look her up that way, you go to enter a treatment, again, you can look it up by the visual number, you can scan it. We just want everyone to get comfortable and not having to go to too many different screens and places to be able to look up and find their animal. The next thing that's really been a game changer for us over the last couple of years, I guess the best way to state this is when we first started the internet program, I thought that was going to be our greatest advantage because it was sustainable and economically viable because we'd only have to make changes in one place on one server. But we soon learned that that was also our biggest disadvantage. I mean, a lot of the ranchers that are here today, I'm sure you have spots, maybe some of you, lots of areas where you have no cell phone coverage of any kind. And so for our program that was 100% web-based, that would preclude us from getting into that type of a market. So we've been able now to have this online program, kind of the best of both worlds, where you can switch it to offline mode. You need internet to do that. So if you were here at the office or in the barn, you have phone service, you switch it to offline mode, and then you can go out and add your calving records for the day, scan your calves and collect weights, do your preg checking, add your treatments, whatever it may be, and then when you get back in service at the end of the day, you hit a sync button on the program, and it synchronizes it all back live. So I think that's probably been our biggest reason for our recent expansion here into the US, is being able to have the best of both worlds there. We also have this interactive inventory dashboard. I just wanted to show this to you. I'm always interested, I don't want to pick on anybody here, but sometimes you'll ask someone and they'll say, how many cows do you have? And if the husband and wife are in the same room together and you're asking that question, you usually create a bit of a domestic because there's a disagreement as to exactly how many everyone's got. But my point being, sometimes it's hard to know because cows come and go and you have some culls and you have some replacements and so forth. It's really nice to have a spot where you can go to and just quickly see exactly what your inventory is at any time. I mean, I know that's mandatory and a given on the feedlot scenarios, but we just find it's a really popular feature with the cow-calf producers that we're working with. There's health protocols that can be assigned. I mean, I've learned watching this from Key and Eric and Feedlot Health. Being a veterinarian, I felt that most of the other programs were very, very weak when it come to assigning diagnosis and treatments and so forth. So we have all of the products with their withdrawals, of course, and the recommended doses that are in your US compendium of cattle products loaded into it. And then you can actually have your veterinarian help you with assigning some protocols. So if you pick calf pneumonia, for example, it will instantly tell you what product to use, the dose. Of course, there's a withdrawal date associated with that. And something that I'll come to here in a little bit is, and I can talk about it now, is about the credentials. Like you have your NHTC and you're all natural. Well, within our program, as soon as anything's been treated with an antibiotic, there's a credential there that'll automatically switch that from a natural to an NTHC. And then, of course, if it ever did get an implant or a hormone of any kind, then it would be switched to which I think you guys term commodity. We call it conventional in our program. That all happens passively in the back end, just strictly by entering the treatments as they occur. And then that's a nice filter for you when you actually go to need to sort and whether it be IMI Global that's doing your audits, et cetera. That can all be pre-made for you. We have interactive pedigree trees, and we do cow and sire in-herd indexing. I'm just going to go through this next one here. And we also have a photo link. Of course, as Eric pointed out, everyone uses their phone for pictures. So it makes real sense for us that if you're in an animal's record and you want to just quickly take a picture, there's a photo link where as soon as you activate that, it embeds the picture right in that animal's record. So you don't have to email it or text it or assign an animal ID to it. And what I'm going to show you here on this next screen is a sample of a cow summary record that we have in our program, which I think will cover or summarize a little bit about all the information that we collect. And keep in mind, I know this is an individual cow record, but we'll quickly come to how you can assimilate all of that and help you with some of your decisions. But this is just a cow. She's an older cow. It's got her classification. She's got her credentials there. She's had 8 progeny, and none of those progeny have died before they were supposed to. Here's another part. I couldn't fit it all on one screen. We do quite a bit of DNA work up north for parentage, for matching sires to the calves, and also part of that DNA will tell us the breed composition. A little bit like your Ancestry.com if you guys, any of you, want to check your lineage and things like that. So this is a cow that's really a nice hybrid, and I found her because she's 14.5% limousine, so I thought whether it would be fitting to have one of those. But we also have this pedigree tree that just gets built as you add calving records year after year. You have the grand dam and you have the dam, and eventually, again, if you're doing some sire DNA, we'd know the sire. If you click on any of those links, it takes you to those other particular animals. Here's a summary of all her progeny. She's had 8 calves. None of them have died, and you'll see here to the right, 5 of those calves have gone on to harvest, meaning we've got carcass data on those calves. So we take all of this information. A lot of it is really just the weaning weight, which can happen on arrival at the feedlot, as we've talked to Jerry. They don't have to be weighed at home because they're likely weaned and moved on to feed. And then of course the carcass data, even when you get that individually, like I saw you get that nice report, think how valuable that would be if we just immediately import and link that all back to your cows. So now you've got this cow with 5 carcass records, 8 progeny records of all this weaning weight. So then we're able to do these selection indexes. So HMI stands for our maternal index, which is, you can question me later, I'll be around to talk about it, but it's an MPPA, and it's combined with how early they calve in the calving season. The terminal index, of course, HTI, which involves nothing but the carcass data. And then we rank that or index that cow based on an all-purpose index, which is a combination of both. But this all happens automatically. And then as you can see, what we want to get to is having this full record history. I'll just work through that here. I already talked about the credentials. Okay, well we'll come back to that. As we enter that information, we'll come back to the calving here for a moment. We have these daily notifications. So if you can imagine on some of your larger herds, which I've talked to some of you here, you've got in excess of 1,000, 2,000 cows. If people were entering that on their phones, regardless of where they're at, you can get a daily email that just updates you as to how many cows have calved, how many total calves you have, how many twins, how many have died. And it's really simple, just entering that. Some of you, the Todd family and stuff were there this morning. I was able to demonstrate how easy it is to enter a calving record. And any of the treatments that get assigned, you'll see that in that notification as well. This is just another sample of a notification. Anything that's on withdrawal, for example, we'll send an email out every Monday that says these are the animals that can't be shipped because they've been treated. Again, that's already flagged and notified in the database, but sometimes it's nice to have a reminder. We have an embryo transfer facility that uses the program for assigning protocols that trigger something for them to do in the future. So as I pointed out, Your vet could help you with how to treat an animal based on your diagnosis. We can daisy chain the protocols, and this is on if any of you have done an OVSync program or synchronize your heifers, this is an example of we'd start all those heifers on a protocol, and you'd get an email reminder that here's all the animals you need to remove the cedar and give them 2 mLs of Estermate. And that would just, you can have that trigger, and then again AI on 2 days later, or whatever that protocol calls for. But at the end of the day, really what we're trying to do within the program, especially specifically for cow-calf, of course, is to identify those cows and index those cows within your herd. And I think it's important for me to point that out. As I see some of your benchmark comparisons on carcass data on how your calves have done against the entire database and the feedlot, when it comes to ranking your cows, we're not ranking herd A to herd B. We feel the biggest benefit within your particular herd is doing a bell curve in your herd and comparing your cows only to your cows. And that's where the real value comes from, is knowing who are your best cows and who are your bottom cows. Here's an example. I just briefly talked about all the indexes on the cows. So we have a large percent, over 90% of the producers in Canada will use this data for selecting replacement heifers. Best example is here, I've just got a list of some cows ranked from top index down through the list there. A great example would be if they wanted to retain 100 replacement heifers, we'd sort off actually 110 just on the data alone, just on maternal indexes. And then we'd go out after we've sorted those 110 and using our visual appraisal, which is, we all do that, structure, disposition, those kind of things, and assess those find 10 that don't meet the requirements on the visual side of things to get us down to our 100. But at least you've used science and really, you want the heifers out of your best cows. It's just sometimes difficult, especially in the larger herds, to be able to identify those. It's easy or it's maybe more fun and exciting to identify the top end. Everyone likes to look at cattle like Jerry's got presented out front here. But I think the biggest value within our system is identifying the ones that are just kind of sneaking by and flying under the radar and well below average in production in your herd. And so managing the bottom end, we spend a lot of time with that. So here are some examples of some specific cows and different herds to bring to your attention. Here's one here. She's already been flagged, you can see, as being a bottom 500 cow in one of our larger herds. But if you look at her weaning weights, and even just the numbers alone are a little bit low, but at the same time, it's our index within the herd that tells you that this is just really not a very good producing cow. She's getting in calf every year. I mean, that's great. She's looking after that part of it. But we need to do something else with this cow. We either maybe need to make a plan to remove her, or we should actually, and our advice would be maybe manage her differently. And that's where we think, we start target mating or assigning bulls differently. Here's another example of a cow. Again, our AAAs are analogous to your choice. But you're all familiar with the CAB, so we have 2 certified Angus AAAs, and then we have 1 single AAA. And you're looking at this carcass data and you think, boy, that's really good if you're all focused on marbling. But what we're seeing here is she's a Y3, which is our lowest yield grade, which we take a big discount on that right now. All of these carcasses here would be in today's market, would be a net discount. We're looking at this cow and your back fat, she's almost got an inch of back fat on each calf. So again, a nice cow, likely maternally and fertile cow. But this is a cow that is likely, and here I'll come back to this one, is likely maybe this type of a breed composition. And I don't want to pick on Angus, but we do have a lot of black and solid red cows in our herds in Canada, and a lot of our producers aren't really aware as to what the breed composition is of those cows. And one thing I think most of us can agree on, based on the fact that you're here and you're using limo and limo cross bulls, is that hybrid vigor works, or heterosis is a valuable attribute. This is a cow that we should not be breeding back to Angus, right? She should be getting bred to anything but an Angus. And that might be her whole problem, is why she's having poor calves, is that she's just randomly getting mated to the wrong type of bull. I want to come back to this other cow here. Some of you will roll your eyes when you see this, but you can see she's had 4 calves, and everyone's died before weaning. And that happens. I mean, some people will say, well, how can that happen? I mean, you should see her dry, or, well, it just does. But not anymore. Once we identify these in the data system, they have that red flag on them. No matter what you're doing with those cows, it shows up at the top. Moving on here to individual sire evaluation, as I mentioned, we do DNA to match calves to their sire, or who's your daddy, as I call it. I think that's so extremely valuable for not only for you that buy the bulls, as I was talking to Jerry, how valuable the feedback would be to Wulf cattle to know how each individual bull that they sold from a certain pedigree, from a certain line of EPDs, how that bull's performing in your environment and within your herd. So I think there's just an immense amount of value on knowing who the sire is. Even the low-hanging fruit is how many calves are they actually siring? You know, I don't think I'll surprise anyone, but when we do this, we have some bulls that sire north of 60 calves a year on, you know, in a multi-sire breeding, and we have some that sire 2. The bad news is sometimes the ones that are siring 60 plus are the ones we don't want to be siring 60 plus, and so forth. So there's all the different performance indices we can line up on the bulls, and I think that'll help you guide you a little bit more, as well as whether it be a pedigree line or a certain type. Maybe the limb flexes are outperforming the purebreds in your particular environment, and that would be an example of where that would assist you with some of your decision making as you buy new bulls.
If you want data on the calf, between a calf and bulls, you've got to pay, like you do with now, $15 to a straw or a piece of hair?
Yeah, you can take hair. Or we have these little ear tag punch now. Allflex have some, Tipifix have some, and you take a little piece of skin out of the ear, and you send that to the lab.
Send that all in.
Yeah, you got to send the DNA. So you need DNA on the bulls, and you need DNA on the calves. Now, I just wanted to show this. I don't wear a breed hat. I'm thrilled. You know, we talked about the value of terminal cross bulls and the carcass value and the feed conversion that you're getting with your limousine cross, and I think that's fantastic. I don't wear a breed hat of any kind, but within each herd, when we do test these bulls, we do categorize them, but we don't categorize them as, you know, a limousine, good limousine, or a bad Simmental, etc. We're categorizing them as heavy muscled, Cavanese, quality grade, like, or marbling. And then, of course, you can see how those can intersect. So you can have a bull that might be a great marbling and a heavy muscled bull, but maybe not a Cavanese. And of course, the holy grail is if you have one bull that can do it all. Those are the bulls, and this is where I get to where you identify those bulls, because we did some sire matching, and you have an outlier that's outstanding. There's no doubt in my mind that someone like Jerry and Wulf Cattle is going to say, boy, we'd sure like to maybe have that bull back, draw some semen on that bull, and maybe we offer that semen to some other people to do some synchronization or some AIing. I mean, that's what it's all about. I mean, identifying bulls out of semen catalogs, I'm not saying it's all bad, but it doesn't really tell the whole story, because you've got the EPDs, you've got the genetic potential, but you really don't know how that's all going to work in your environments. As I talked to the people from Arizona, and of course the people that are here, they were sweating when they said they come up here, and it's, you know, they're up in the hills and it's still 85, and we get here and it's minus 15. I mean, cattle, as we all know, perform differently in different environments. And sometimes it's not a matter of figuring out what's the best genetics as much as it is which genetics work in your particular situation. So in summary, really all we're trying to do is give you a simple tool to capture your information, and then subsequent to that, provide that information in a format that helps you with your daily decisions. We're not here to tell you what to do with it. but just to make sure you have it in a format that works for you. There's so much data that gets collected that never gets used, and I think that's the problem. So that's everything, and that concludes my talk, and then I think we're going to now just take some questions from all of you if you have anything in particular.
So with that, I mean, it was a lot of information, kind of started with the very high level and backed into what we all do at the feed yard, and then also kind of painted a picture of, you know, potentially where it could go, or where the opportunity is on the cow-calf level. As we travel around shipping cattle, I have noticed more and more different cow programs or people using things on their cell phones, and just wanted to provide a little information on, you know, a system that does actually fully integrate into the feedlot software that we use as well. So with that, we will take questions on, you know, any of the three presentations. So the question was, if it's possible to sample every calf as they're coming through the chute for DNA, correct? Yeah, if you collect the tissue sample on every bull before the turnout, and then would collect tissue sample on every calf, they could link them together. I don't know that it's...
Yeah, so you already know some of the sires, is what you're saying. Yeah, no, but it doesn't matter when you do it, though. I mean, they could arrive at the feedlot and we could sample them then, or you can do them at birth. Yeah, yeah, but you can sample them at any time. They're really nice little ear punch tag systems now, and the DNA technology is so good now that where it was problematic before is if you had a lot of related sires. So maybe you bought 4 bulls that were out of a certain sire. Like you look at the reference sires in Jerry's catalog tomorrow. There's a lot of bulls out of the same sire. One of the problems we had early on with the DNA, they weren't doing enough SNPs, as they say, or genotypes, to sort out which half brother, you know, sired certain calves. That's not an issue anymore. They're very, very good. You could have full brothers, actually. You could have full ET brothers out breeding, and the DNA will sort out exactly which bull sired which calves. Yeah, absolutely. There's a company down here called GeneSeek, and it's actually aligned with the one we use in Canada and Edmonton called Delta Genomics. And between one of those two companies, they both work together. They both have similar technologies. So if you wanted to do that, it's available.
Wayne, you had a question?
The cost is because we want to work with Wulfs and stuff on an ongoing basis. We're going to do it on just a straight subscription fee of $1 per cow per year. That's how that's going to be set up moving forward. Oh, is that what you asked? No.
So DNA is probably 5 to 15, depending.
And it depends if you want just the parentage, or if you want the parentage and the breed composition, right? Parentage you can get as low as $6 right now. Just the straight parentage, yeah. $6 US. That's like 15 Canadian. Yeah.
Any other questions? Travis.
This is for Troy. I was just curious if you're
Yes, we do work with the breed associations, and so we do have for example, what I didn't point out is you can customize the screens for the purebred producers versus commercial producers for what entries you want to make in there. And so the Canadian Simmental, Canadian Angus, and the Canadian Charolais, we have a direct link with them. It wouldn't be very hard to do the same with the American associations, because the last thing we want you to be able to have to do is enter it into one program, which is a superior management program. It really is. I mean, your breed associations don't offer you anything else like what we have, but we don't want you double entering that. So we want to make sure that we can submit that, and we've already done it with those 3 associations, so it wouldn't be that difficult to do it down here.
Anyone else?
How many of the 600 producers or whatever you've got are DNAing their calves? Like, is it a massive amount? How many?
No, I would say we have about 50 producers.
So how many heads would that roughly be?
About 4,000.
And they're getting DNA just preparing it, or doing both?
No, they're doing both. Everyone's really actually almost more excited about the way the breed comes.
Really?
Yeah. We're doing a research project on the heterosis side of things, and one of the things that come out of that is key at the very top there of the top metric he talked about was feed conversion or feed efficiency. And one of the things Dr. John Bezura out of the Lacombe Research Station is correlated through grow safe data and our breed composition, and I hope I get this right, but for every 10% increase in heterosis or in hybrid vigor, you improve feed conversion by a 1/4 pound per head per day. Now, of course, there's a ceiling on that. I mean, you know, where you get to a half blood or a 3/4 blood, etc. There's a perfect target to hit there. It's not a linear relationship, but I think the take-home point is, and they're doing some stuff on fertility now, that if you've got a bunch of straight bred cows and you're a commercial producer, you really should be breeding them to something else to maximize heterosis or hybrid vigor in your herd. And a lot of our Canadian herds just simply don't know, because again, we're so solid colored up there. It's all black and all red with different variations on the face. We really don't know the breed composition. And as you can see, it's been really quite surprising for a lot of the producers to see what a high percentage of Angus, for example, they may have in their cows. Yes?
Yeah, this question for Keith. I know you've had some experience with cattle in the past since you worked with Wulf Cattle Company. Tell me what you have, maybe some things that assumptions you have been able to confirm since working with this population of limousine influenced cattle, and maybe some surprises, good or bad surprises you've seen in working with limousine influenced cattle.
I think on GK Jim Farms and Wulf Cattle have jointly purchased Limousin influenced cattle, right, to feed out, and we've collected we have all the data at the feedlot, as you can see, all the carcass data and so on. And I think that as everything that's been written about the cattle and the information that's been published by the Nebraska studies on all of the the characteristics, especially conversion and dressing percentage, we've been able to confirm that. And also we've been able to document the improvement in percentage choice over time. If you go back and look at some of the the straight early imports, right, early on versus to where they are now. So all of those things are trending in the right direction. And also on the other side of it, don't forget that a lot of the Limousin cattle are being used in the dairy program to produce the beef builder cattle. And we have literally thousands of those cattle on feed that we're understanding the carcass characteristics of those cattle. And over time, the amount of carcass data that's available on the bulls will be thousands of animals per sire. right? So very quickly it will become the most powerful database for predicting carcass traits, right? Because it's not going to be based on EPDs from 25 head, right? This is going to be based on literally thousands of progeny that these cattle are going to produce. So very quickly it'll dwarf any other breed association or any other breed in terms of the accuracy and predictability of the carcass data. So it's pretty exciting. I mean, you're going from a few records, right, that all of the carcass stuff is based on, to literally thousands of records, right, to be able to make the decision. So it's something pretty unique in the beef cattle production system. And with that, also as an aside, we talked about a bull that produces 60 calves and a bull that produces 3 or 4 calves. That may not all be about libido, right? It could be about fertility, and in doing these matings, in using semen in the dairy system, they'll be able to select for high fertility bulls as well. And again, nobody else can really do that, right? Because you don't have the thousands of observations that you would need or to do it. So when you're measuring the number of calves produced, you don't know whether it's a fertility issue or a libido issue, right? And so we'll be able to sort that out over time as well.
Well, you've got the mic. One other question. So
Yep.
you all in Canada have moved a lot faster towards this whole sustainability effort. And I'm curious to know what you think that's going to mean in the United States, both in terms of record keeping and just cattle management in general. It seems like Canada has at least got more records. I don't know if you've embraced it, but certainly has some serious
Probably the only good news thing to come out of BSE, which was a gut-wrenching experience for producers in Canada, because being a 50% exporter, I don't have to tell you what happens when half your market disappears and you can't eat all the beef, right? So you go from 80-cent cattle to 16-cent cattle. But out of that crisis, the industry was able to, in a time of crisis, to agree that we're going to go to national ID, right? And we have discovered that it isn't a form of communism, right? As the Texans would lead you to believe, right? So if you put an ID in your calf, the cow police are not going to come and count your cows, and the tax department isn't going to come after you, right? So, we couldn't get it done either until we had a crisis, right? So we had a national ID program, and I'm getting around to your question, right? So from that collaborative effort, so you cannot leave the ranch of origin in Canada, you cannot be sold unless you have an RFID in your ear. That RFID doesn't allow me as a feedlot operator to scan your calf and figure out where it comes from. Right? It doesn't do that at all. It's an identifier that's in the national database, so in the event of a food safety or animal health crisis, the regulatory USDA, our equivalent thereof called CFIA, could find the ranch of origin of that animal, right? And that's why on some of these other initiatives, like sustainability and the McDonald's thing, right, we've been a little more open to that sort of idea and thinking, because we already have a core national ID program, which is pivotal for the sustainability, right? That's the corner pin of how it starts. And so I guess out of a crisis, our mindset was changed a little bit, right? Of how we view, some of these in some ways, higher level programs that are for the benefit of the entire industry, and because they'll help us with the consumer, and they'll help us with the acceptance of our product in export markets and so on. So I would agree, we've been a little bit more cooperative as an industry in getting to a common ground that will benefit everybody, and all boats will float a little bit higher, right? Not something that we do particularly well in the cattle business generally. I hope is that okay. Yeah, but it took a major catastrophe to change our thinking, though, right? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, if there's any other questions or comments, because if not, Jerry just asked me to just say a few words here about what the future might hold on the beef cattle side. I'm extremely bullish on the future of the beef cattle industry in North America. I think that traditionally we've had very significant beef cattle cycles, and it sort of plays out where we grow our herds, supply exceeds our domestic consumption and our demand, and the price goes down, right? And we've all been through that, right? But I think what's going to be fundamentally different going ahead is the demand piece coming from export markets, right? The established economies of Japan and Korea and the emerging demand coming from the emerging economies, particularly of China and Southeast Asia. By 2025, China will have a population of middle class equivalent to the entire North America. I mean, you just think about that, right? So you've got another US, Canada combined where everybody's in the middle class. What happens when income levels rise? People do two things, and I hope they're not connected. They have less children and they eat more beef. 100% true, right? And that's been true of every economy in the world, including sub-Saharan Africa, right? So and it's not beef specifically. You eat less plant-based protein and you eat more meat-based protein. But if you have a choice, the global appetite favors beef. Doesn't matter what culture, it doesn't matter where you go in the world, bad beef is better than excellent chicken. Right? It really is. Right? So I mean, and I'm fortunate enough I get to travel quite a bit, and you can see that this thing is not going to be connected to what we're going to do here in North America. We will have an increased total consumption related to a slightly increasing population, right? But the other thing that's very positive is demand is not going down. True demand is not going down like it was for many years. It's bottomed and it's slightly increasing, right? So we're clearing product at higher and higher levels of price levels. The price of fat cattle, went to $1.70, $1.70. It might not get there again in the near future, but we cleared the beef. Did people quit eating beef? No. It was the best demand period ever when measured again, true demand measured by price in relation to quantity. So I think the product that we have, high quality grain-fed beef, the product of North America, not grass-fed beef. Everyone says, oh, we can't compete with South America. 100% true on grass-fed beef. It's not the product you're producing, right? We are the low-cost producers of high-quality grain-fed beef in the world, the end, period. Right? There's nobody else. Australia, periodically, but Australia has two types of climate. It's either too hot or too cold. Right? So, their consistency in being able to produce grain-fed beef at the same price point is not really there consistently. Right? So we're in an excellent position in North America to supply this product. And also, we have vast tracts of land, right, both in Canada and the US, that you can't do anything else with. What's going to happen what are you going to do on a section of land in Arizona if you can't put 10 cows on it? Like, what other creature in the universe are you going to put there? Lizards. Yeah, exactly. Right. So beef cattle, they thrive under a wide variety of climates and geographies throughout the world. And I just can't see much on the horizon that's a bad picture. Even in North America, demand is actually improving, and all of the health issues that plagued us for a while surrounding beef, you don't hear much about that anymore, do you? So we're off that list. However we got on it, I don't really know, but you're not hearing all of the many issues that people perceive to be, surrounding meat consumption, red meat consumption, beef consumption, fat, all of that stuff, right? So I don't know. I'm pretty bullish about where things are headed. I think we can get to substantially greater cow herds in both Canada and the U.S. and still have good pricing and viability in the business. Both in Canada and the U.S., in the last 4 years, it's been the gold, silver, and bronze medal for calf prices in history. Right? So it ain't been that bad. Right? It really hasn't been. And if the levels that we're selling calves at now is not sustainable in the system that you're in, you better be having a hard look at what you're doing or thinking about it, because I think the levels go up from here, but you should be profitable at these levels. And then the final thing to add to it, despite all the doom and gloom you hear and all of the problems in the world and so on, let's remember, right, this is the greatest period of affluence in human history that we're living in today. Right? The greatest period of affluence in human history. It's never been so good for so many people in the earth as a percentage as it is today. Right? And that means that people will eat beef. All right. Thank you. Good night.
One final thing, Dean Somerville has a presentation here.
Thank you, Nate. I happen to, in listening to tonight, as many of you know, I taught school for several years before I became Executive Secretary of the Heartland Association, and I happen to think I'm sure glad my principals didn't have the herd tracks and the health requirements, because every fourth Friday in March I got the flu for the first 12 years, and I'm glad that they weren't able to track it back at that time. This is the 30th sale, is that correct? My son bought his first heifer at your first sale. And so it's been a yearly tradition, an annual tradition for our family to be here, and we're certainly glad we're here. The presentation I have to make tonight has to do with the generosity and the support of the limousine associations by Wulf Cattle. We had a tragedy happen 2 years ago in which a young lady was killed on a four-wheeler that was a part of the limousine family in Iowa. And to kind of honor Jordan Muxfelt, the daughter of Jay and Laurie Strait, the Heartland Association put together a project to commemorate her in a memorial portrait in which we called The Final Drive. And Judy Simmons, who is here tonight, and Norma Efforts from North Dakota kind of coordinated this program. And of course it meant banners, people. They could buy a banner, they could buy a person and put it in this portrait. And one outstanding thing was that Wulf Cattle not only bought a banner, but they also bought the judge. And that they were both put in the portrait. I don't think Jerry may have seen it, may not have seen it, but we have a print to give him tonight of that picture, and we appreciate the support of Wulf Cattle. Jerry, you want to come forward? Oh, you want to come around?
Okay, so with that, we'll wrap up, and thank you all for coming. Troy, these guys, Key, Eric, they'll all be around tomorrow. If you have any questions regarding your health data or anything else, feel free to mingle with them tomorrow. And Casey, anything else? Or we thank you all for attending, and we'll see you tomorrow.